It's all a diagonal argument is going to be the topic of this rant. It's all a diagonal argument. What do I mean? To start, I mean, fuck you, Wittgenstein, you fucking Nazi. Why am I saying that? Okay, Wittgenstein, this pretentious fuck. Again, like, seriously, I have zero respect for Wittgenstein. I've read Wittgenstein. I'm gonna eviscerate this motherfucker. Why? Well, he thought he could get away with eviscerating my goddamn hero, Georg Cantor. Georg fucking Cantor, metal as fuck, spoke the truth. Everyone told him he was fucking insane. Why? Because they were idiots and were unwilling, obviously, to address the reality of their own stupidity. And he was vulnerable. He was a depressive. He had some spiritual convictions regarding the infinite that they thought were silly. So, you know, fuck him, right? He's the one that gets dragged away to the mental hospital because no one will acknowledge what the fuck he's saying. And then it turns out, oh, everything he was saying was absolutely goddamn fucking true. Not just true, essential. Essential to the last, like, 100 years of science and mathematics. Oops. Wittgenstein, oops. You expect me to respect Ludwig Wittgenstein, this fucking Nazi, this classmate of Adolf Hitler, who went down in history, as far as I'm concerned, making fun of one of the greatest mathematical geniuses ever, as if he was a goddamn moron. You expect me to respect Wittgenstein. Fuck Wittgenstein and fuck anyone who respects Wittgenstein, especially today. In the 21st century, if you don't just take a shit on Wittgenstein's fucking writings, you're an idiot. Newsflash. Okay, it's all a diagonal argument. What do I mean? Georg Cantor's entire, contribution, essentially. Well, let me back up. Most people think in mathematics, they watch, like, Good Will Hunting or something, and they see very complicated mathematics on a chalkboard, right? And they think that, like, every mathematician who's made a serious contribution to mathematics has made some kind of convoluted, complicated, fills the entire chalkboard sort of contribution. That's not true. In fact, in most instances, even if there is a very rigorous and lengthy proof or something, it can be summarized very elegantly and simply because the entire project of mathematics is to pursue the highest level of generality possible. The average person doesn't know what the fuck I'm talking about, though, right? Like, they're like, huh? Numbers or what? So anyway, Cantor, his art, look, let me run it down. This whole thing that it took human beings, fucking like 40, 50 years to, like, accept. And still to this day, people are not accepting what Georg Cantor said because they think it's too far out or something. Here's what he said. The natural numbers. Don't know what they are, you should feel ashamed, right? Unless you're enumerate, you should feel ashamed for not knowing what the natural numbers are because you're fucking willfully ignorant then. In the 21st century, if you don't know what the natural numbers are, you're an idiot. But what are they? It's, the integers with the negatives, it's just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so, natural numbers. That's one number system, let's say. Doesn't matter what we call it, right? Like, yeah, in set theory, there are very rigorous terminologies, schools for referring to all this. I don't care, though. Like, it's numbers. You can call it whatever the fuck you want. There are natural numbers, which are integers. They're indivisible. They're whole. I mean, they are divisible, of course, but, like, they're represented in the natural number sequence as indivisible whole identities. They're discrete. They are, therefore, countable or listable, meaning you can go in order, and there is nothing between 1 and 2. That is considered a natural number anyway, right? Like, in other words, we know that there are things between 1 and 2 because we're already anticipating this other extension of the natural numbers, which is the real numbers. The real numbers are the ones that we actually use consciously as average people, consciously on a daily basis. We use things like complex numbers and even quaternions. My phone right now is using quaternions to orient itself spatially. I won't get into what quaternions are, but they're necessary to, well, I mean, they're optimal, you might say, for programming three-dimensional orientation, basically. They're an extension of the complex numbers. They're the next step up, right? The complex numbers are two-dimensional, quaternions are four-dimensional. Anyway, the real numbers are one-dimensional. They're the ones that you use on your Google Maps, right? Like, and your bank account. You have decimal numbers. You know, one way to also, like, natural numbers are phone numbers, right? Like, phone numbers are digits, just individual natural numbers. Real numbers are your bank account and Google Maps, right? I'm just trying to put it in, like, what are the terms that people actually use on a daily basis? You know, you get a receipt from the store, it's real numbers. There's a decimal, you know, it only goes out to two places, I guess, in the receipt, but like in your bank account, it might go out of a few more places, I don't know. Usually only two, but anyway. Gary-Cantor. All right, so we got natural numbers, we got real numbers. There's a difference. It doesn't take a genius to see there's a difference. What is the difference? That's really the point, is like, if you can see that there's a difference between real numbers and natural numbers, and you'd have to be an idiot not to, and again, unless you're a numerate, in which case you are off the hook, right? Like, you're basically colorblind to numbers. You should not be shamed for what is a physiological condition. But there are people who are willfully ignorant of this, and those motherfuckers need to wake the fuck up, basically. You know, like, you're an idiot. But yeah, we can all see that there's a difference between natural numbers and real numbers. Gary-Cantor was like the guy who said what it was. He's like, hey guys, there's a difference. Duh. What is it? The natural numbers, you can list them in a row and know where you're at in the sequence. The real numbers, you can't. They're unlistable because there's infinitely many numbers between any two real numbers. Or did I just blow your fucking mind? Yeah, he did, Evan. In other words, that's literally all he fucking said. I mean, yeah, there's a whole set theory tradition that emerges around this insight, and there's this notion of the cardinality of the transfinite numbers, such that the natural numbers are considered to have the cardinality of Aleph null, and the real numbers are considered to have the cardinality of Aleph 1. And then you have this question of, well, what is Aleph 2? And then for the next, like, 100 years, people have been trying to examine that question. You know, I have my own mathematical philosophical approach to that question. I'm just going to be considered a crackpot, right? Like, people are going to laugh at me, even if I'm right. You know, like, I want to believe, of course, that I have some insight into this. But even if I do, I would suspect that people will treat me exactly the way that they treated Gary-Cantor, which is to be like, what? You're an idiot. It can't be that obvious. You know, we're smart. We have PhDs. You know, I'm Kronecker. Look up Kronecker, that motherfucker. He was an idiot. Like, he should go down in history as just a stupid fucking idiot. And Gary-Cantor should go down in history as the guy who was right and didn't give a fuck. But no, we, like, extend equal respect to these people as if they're, you know, like, equivalent. They're not. You know, anyway. My point is, you don't need to understand the full, you know, rigorous, sophisticated terminology of set theory to understand what Gary-Cantor was saying, right? If you understand that there's a difference between your phone numbers and your bank account numbers, right? So natural numbers and real numbers. And if you can understand that the difference is that between having, there's just infinitely many numbers between any two real numbers, and there are zero many numbers between any two natural numbers. That's it. Which means they are of different cardinalities with regards to their infinity. I guess I didn't point that out, but I took that for granted, that there are infinitely many natural numbers and there are infinitely many real numbers. But the real numbers are of a different order of magnitude with regards to their infinity. That's all that Gary-Cantor was saying. In other words, I'm not a mathematical genius, or at least wouldn't be considered. Like, I don't know what that even means, frankly. I mean, people assume that means you can calculate numbers really fast. And I can't do that, for sure. So, like, I'm not that. I struggle to remember, complicated mathematical theorems and stuff, like, whatever it is to be a mathematical genius, I assume I am definitely not that. But I can understand what the fuck Gary-Cantor was saying. So, my point, what was fucking Wittgenstein's problem? This motherfucker who was too stupid, too arrogant to understand. And who reminder, was a classmate of Adolf Hitler. Like, maybe there's actually a sociocultural problem behind this. Anyway, so I open this by saying it's all a diagonal argument. What do I mean by that? I mean that the things that matter the most, and anyone who's familiar with my emerging philosophical worldview, which is radical depressive realism, knows that the central concept is antinatalism, specifically an ethical form of antinatalism that is premised, I can sum it up very simply, it's just that it's inherently, unavoidably, irrefutably wrong, a mistake, to bring a child into existence where they will be condemned, at a minimum, to torture and death without their consent, non-defensively and avoidably, meaning you're not doing this in self-defense. You're coming up with a shitty, stupid, emotionally insecure, fearful reason to do this. That is wrong, right? And the thing is, to me, that is obvious. That's a diagonal argument. I am saying there's a difference between the reproductive society, this underlying assumption, which is the unconscious assumption of us human beings, of course, as evolutionary creatures. We are programmed to reproduce unthinkingly. But then someone like me comes along, and I'm not the first one by any means. Like, there have been people who have said this throughout all of history, but nobody gave a fuck about them. And in general, they were ostracized, just like I am. Like, people treated them even worse than they treated me, by far. But yeah, someone like me comes along and is like, that's wrong. Like, why the fuck would we do that? And everyone's like, heretic, he's insane. They just freak out because it's obvious. And if it is so obvious, to admit that you've made this mistake would mean you're admitting to a very obvious error, which is very shameful and embarrassing. And people don't want to do that, of course. They want to avoid feeling like shit, like feeling like you are what you are, which is a slave owner. If you have children, you own slaves. There's no way around it. That's what you are. You're a slave owner. And people will say, well, I treat my slaves real good, though. I love my slaves. I gives them all the food. I gives them lots of money. I gives them bicycles and video games. All this shit. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, that's exactly what the fuck slave owners in the South during, like the 1850s, that's what the fuck they were saying. They would say to an abolitionist who owns no slaves, what do you know about slaves? You don't own any slaves. You don't know how to keep slaves in line. I know. I got 100 slaves back at my place. I know all about it. What do you know? You're going to come here and tell me that you know all about slaves, Mr. Arrogant Know-It-All. You know how slaves are supposed to be treated. And the abolitionist is like, no, that's the whole point, is you have no right to treat the slaves in any way. Like, they should be free. They're their own people. And the slave owner's like, you're talking a different gibberish. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But one thing I know is I'm a good person. I'm a slave owner, and I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And if you got to say otherwise, then we got problems. And the abolitionist is like, yeah, well, then we got problems, motherfucker. Like, try to intimidate me all the fuck you want. You are a fucking slave owner. You're a fascist. You are abusing people in broad daylight and thinking that you have the right to do it. I'm going to die on the hill of saying, no, you don't. And many of the abolitionists were like, you know what? I used to think this was somehow okay. Like, abolitionists are not superheroes who deserve to be, have statues made of them and everything. For the most part, abolitionists are just people who woke the fuck up and saw the obvious truth and were like, okay, I'm not going to die a coward knowing that there are innocent people being brutalized under this stupid fucking insane slavery system without doing something. I'm going to die to do something about this, right? And that's how I feel with regards to antinatalism. People will think oh, so you think you're going to end reproduction? No, I don't. No more than I think we're going to end